So much has been talked about this debate over Medicare, and one of the big attack lines that you have about the president is that he's going to cut $700 billion from Medicare. And some folks have said that that's a little misleading, and they point to your own plan. And I know you've talked about how you've adopted Governor Romney's plan. But is it hypocritical at all for you to attack the president's plan when you yourself called for a plan that said reducing Medicare costs about the same rate that the president did?
No, what we said was for the next generation, you need to reform the program, but leave it intact for current seniors. That's very, very different than Obamacare. Let's not forget that the reason this $716 billion cut to Medicare is in Obamacare is to pay for Obamacare. We in the House have always voted to repeal every bit of Obamacare, including this raid of $716 billion from Medicare to pay for Obamacare. More importantly, the Romney plan is all about restoring that money and stopping that raid. All the repeal votes we've had in Congress are about that. And so we've been really clear. We don't think Medicare should be used as a piggy bank to pay for Obamacare.
But is it appropriate to call it a cut? Isn't it a reduction in the growth of spending? And isn't that something that you've called for throughout your
Sure,
career?
it's a reduction in the growth of spending in a way that, according to Medicare themselves, 43% of seniors who chose Medicare Advantage will lose their plans. According to Medicare itself, this Obamacare plan will mean 1 out of 6 hospitals and nursing homes go out of business or just stop taking Medicare beneficiaries. So our argument is we should not compromise the benefits for current seniors. You don't have to, unless you want to use it to pay for Obamacare, which we don't. What you need to do is save it for your generation, my generation, by putting those reforms in place so that we can better guarantee the promise of Medicare as it's known today for the current generation.
But didn't Medicare's own actuary call this plan something that will sustain the financial health of Medicare over the long term?
The actuary of Medicare added an appendix to his entire report and said, by the way, you can't count the same dollar twice. You can't say, I'm using this money for Obamacare and then use it for Medicare. So Medicare's own actuary has confirmed everything we've said.
Now, I'm sure you've seen the wake of your convention speech. You were called a liar. You said that a lot of what you said was misleading. How do you respond to some of that criticism? There was the talk of the GM plant in your hometown.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Medicare attack line. Do you think that's a fair criticism at all?
Obviously, I don't.
Did you stretch the truth at all?
Not in the least. Of course not. Look, I wouldn't have said any of these things if we weren't completely sure about them. What we learn is that the president can't run on his own record. President Obama's failed leadership is something he doesn't want to talk about, so he's going to throw all these labels at us. He's going to distort and blame and demagogue. The president came to my hometown and said, we're going to keep this plant open for another 100 years. That didn't happen. My friends from high school who work there are out of work to this day. So the point I'm making is, this is one more example of the president going around the country, running for president, making all these promises that are no broken promises. The president said he was going to cut the deficit in half in 4 years. That hasn't happened. The president said, if you pass my stimulus, unemployment will never get above 8%. It's been above 8% for 42 months. So the president made all these promises, including to people in my hometown, including Americans across the country, and they're now broken promises. And people need to be held accountable for the promises they make.
Another area where you've been criticized is your criticism over the sequestration aspect of this latest budget plan. Isn't that something that you endorsed? I mean, you were part of a Congress that agreed to this plan that unless you came up with a solution to the debt ceiling crisis, that this was what was going to happen. Weren't you part of that?
And I also authored the legislation replacing the cuts in the sequester with cuts elsewhere. I'm the guy who took the bill to the floor of Congress and passed it that said the president's reckless defense cuts go too far, and we're going to replace those sequester defense cuts with cuts in other areas of government. That's what we did in the House of Representatives. The problem is the president gave us about $500 billion in defense cuts, which we think are reckless, which we obviously don't agree with. And then, because he's not willing to fix the sequester, he's done nothing to fix the sequester, the Senate hasn't either, we have this looming, devastating defense cut staring us in the face, whereas we in the House already passed solutions to prevent this sequester from taking place in the first place by cutting government spending elsewhere.
But you talk about cutting government spending elsewhere. But Republicans in the House, Eric Cantor, our congressman here, have been accused of not agreeing with the president on anything, that a lot of your policies have been specifically just to put roadblocks in the president's way.
Here's how you get to common ground. Here's how you get things done in Washington. Bring your ideas to the table. Pass solutions. Then other people pass theirs, and then you start negotiating. The president hasn't done that. The Senate hasn't done that. We passed a bill preventing the sequester. The president doesn't have any solution. The Senate hasn't passed one. We passed a budget to get the economy growing, to pay off the debt. The president hasn't offered a solution to that. The Senate hasn't passed a budget in 3 years. We have dozens of bills that the House passed to save this country from a debt crisis, to prevent these defense cuts. Mitt Romney is proposing specific solutions to get people back to work, to get higher take-home pay, to have strong national defense, to prevent a debt crisis, to protect Medicare. President Obama hasn't proposed those solutions. The Senate hasn't done anything like that.
My last question for you. Both sides talk about the negative tone of the campaign. They accuse the other side of being very negative, and then a few minutes later, we hear attacks. And it's not just you, it's the president, it's Governor Romney. Doesn't one of you have to stand up and say, I'm done with the negative attacks, in order to have some sort of ground to stand on when you accuse the other side of being?
I think people have to see the contrast. I think the president is trying to run away from his record, and you simply can't do that. If we want the next 4 years to be different, then we shouldn't have the same leadership. More to the point, the entire purpose of the Romney plan for a stronger middle class is to show that Mitt Romney and I are offering actual solutions to our country's problems. Specific ideas and solutions to get people back to work, to get higher take-home pay, to make sure that our children inherit a debt-free nation. So we're offering those solutions, bold reforms to get the economy growing again. The president's offering none of this. The president won't even talk about his record, and he's the one who's trying to bring this campaign down to one of division, down to discord. It's a campaign based on smear and fear, anger and frustration. We're pointing out the president's record because it's his record, but we're also offering solutions, and we think we owe people that.
All right. Congressman Ryan,
You bet, Ryan. Good to see you again.